Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful ideas in all of history, nationalism. It's this massive story, right, about how one single idea, over just 100 years or so, completely redrew the map of Europe and, really, shaped the world we all live in today.
So let's start with a big question. How do you actually build a nation? I mean, is it just about having an army and drawing borders? Or is it something more? Is it built with flags, with anthems, with shared stories that everybody believes in?
Well, in the 19th century, the struggle to answer that exact question literally tore Europe apart. It sparked revolutions, it toppled ancient empires, but at the very same time, it's what forged the countries we now recognize on the map. It was a chaotic, creative, and often incredibly violent process.
But here's the thing. Our story doesn't kick off on some bloody battlefield. Nope. It starts in an artist's studio with a dream of what the world could be.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1848, and we've got this French artist, Frédéric Sariou, and he has this incredibly utopian dream of a future world, a world made up of democratic and social republics all living together in harmony.
I mean, just look at the incredible optimism here in his vision. You see this long, winding train of nations, right? Each with their own flag, all marching together past the Statue of Liberty. And check this out. Down on the ground, you've got the shattered crowns and symbols of the old kings. That's a huge statement. And then, looking down from the heavens, you have Christ and angels, symbolizing this idea of brotherhood or fraternity among all these new nations. This was the dream, the beautiful, idealistic starting point for nationalism.
But this wasn't just some fantasy cooked up in an art studio. No way. Decades before Sariou even picked up his tools, France had already provided a real-world and, an explosive blueprint for how to make this dream a reality.
So it all really kicks off in 1789. The French Revolution just shatters this old idea that a country belongs to a king. All of a sudden, sovereignty, the power, is handed over to the people, to the citizens. And the revolutionaries, they got to work creating a shared identity. They came up with ideas like la patrie, the fatherland, and le citoyen, the citizen. They created a new flag, the tricolor, and a central government. They were literally, actively building what it meant to be French.
And then Napoleon Bonaparte storms onto the scene. And this guy was a total paradox, a walking contradiction. As his armies marched across Europe, on one hand, they were seen as bringing liberty. I mean, they were abolishing the old feudal system, establishing equality before the law, all great stuff. But on the other hand, they were instruments of total oppression. We're talking censorship, crazy high taxes, and forcing people to join his army. So liberator and tyrant all rolled into one.
Okay, so after Napoleon is finally defeated in 1815, you have the old monarchies of Europe just storming back, and they have one goal and one goal only: to slam the door shut on all this revolutionary talk and stuff, and slam that nationalism genie right back in its bottle.
And the guys who beat Napoleon, they were conservatives through and through. For them, it was all about tradition, about preserving the power of the monarchy, the church, and the way society had always been structured. You have guys like Austria's Duke Metternich leading the charge, and their whole plan was basically to hit the rewind button on Europe and put all the old royal families back on their thrones.
But you can't just make an idea disappear. The ideas of the revolution were very much alive, especially with the growing middle class. Your merchants, your doctors, your lawyers. They fully embraced this new ideology, liberalism. They wanted freedom, equality, governments that actually listened to the people. And this was the dangerous new idea that the old guard was absolutely desperate to crush.
And this slide, wow, it just perfectly captures the tug of war for Europe's soul. On one side, you've got Duke Metternich, the face of the old conservative order, and on the other, you have revolutionaries like the Italian Giuseppe Mazzini, who was fighting tooth and nail for unified democratic nations. Metternich wasn't kidding when he called Mazzini the most dangerous enemy of our social order. I mean, the battle lines were clearly drawn.
But you know what? The conservatives couldn't hold this idea down forever. It was just too powerful. Despite all the crackdowns, the spirit of nationalism refused to die. It just went underground, simmering, just waiting for its moment to explode all over again. And that moment, it came in 1830. Duke Metternich himself couldn't have said it better. When France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches cold. And that's exactly what happened. Revolution erupted once more in Paris, and that spark just ignited fires all across the continent.
And you can just see this chain reaction spreading.
First, in France, another king gets the boot. Then, inspired by that, Belgium breaks away from the Netherlands. Over in the east, Greece finally, after a long, hard fight, wins its independence from the Ottoman Empire. And even in a place like Poland, where a rebellion against Russia was brutally crushed, the people kept their national spirit alive, using their language as a kind of weapon of cultural resistance.
And this really shows that building a nation wasn't just about politics and armies. It was also about culture, about stories. There was this whole cultural movement called Romanticism, and it was all about celebrating the unique spirit of a people, what the Germans called Das Volk. They looked to folk songs, fairy tales, shared history, all to create this feeling of a shared identity. The argument was that a nation isn't just a place ruled by a king, it's a people bound together by a common soul. So all this pressure, this tension, it finally just boils over in 1848. It was called the springtime of the peoples, this massive wave of revolutions that just swept across Europe. People were hungry, they were out of work, and they were demanding change. Liberal constitutions, national unity, the old order was seriously shaken.
But, and this is a huge but, the liberal revolutionaries of 1848, they ultimately failed. The monarchies came back and crushed the revolts. And this is a really crucial turning point in our story. Since the idealists couldn't forge nations through speeches and debates, the job was taken over by a new and frankly, a far more ruthless kind of leader, the pragmatic conservative statesman.
And that brings us to this guy, Otto von Bismarck of Prussia. Just look at his plan. He had zero time for liberal dreams and speeches. He famously said that the great questions of the day would be decided not by speeches, but by iron and blood. And his execution of that plan was just ruthless. He provoked 3 short, decisive wars over 7 years, and boom, the result was a unified German empire led by Prussia.
And a very similar playbook was used to unify Italy. For centuries, Italy was just what they called a geographical expression, just a bunch of separate little states. But under the leadership of Sardinia-Piedmont and its super clever chief minister, Count Cavour, Italy was forged into a single nation. They used a mix of everything: savvy diplomacy, war, and even harnessing the passion of the revolutionaries.
So, by the late 1800s, it kind of seems like Soryu's dream had come true, right? Germany is a nation, Italy is a nation. But as the century started to wrap up, this powerful idea of the nation began to twist and transform into something much darker, much more aggressive.
Yeah, that spirit of fraternity and brotherhood, it was pretty much gone. Nationalism wasn't about liberating your own people anymore. It became about dominating other people. The goal wasn't just to create your own nation-state, it was to build a sprawling empire. And this new aggressive nationalism, well, we call it imperialism.
And there was no place where this was more dangerous than in the Balkans. You had this huge region with incredible ethnic diversity, mostly controlled by the crumbling Ottoman Empire. As the Ottomans got weaker, new nations, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, started to emerge. But these new nations, high on this new aggressive nationalism, immediately started fighting with each other over land. And to make things worse, the big European powers all started meddling, pouring fuel on the fire to advance their own imperial goals. This place became known as the powder keg of Europe, just sitting there, waiting for a single spark to set off a global catastrophe.
And that spark, as we all know, would ignite the First World War. It's a pretty sobering journey, isn't it? From Soryu's beautiful, idealistic dream of fraternity to the brutal trenches of 1914. And it leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question. How does a story that starts with uniting a people become a weapon that divides the entire world? That's a question the 20th century paid a heavy price to answer. And honestly, it's one we're still grappling with today.